Madam Chair, we're ready to start the meeting.
It is now 5 p.m. I would like to call the Special Cultural Heritage Commission meeting of Friday, February 18th, 2021 to order. Before I proceed, I want to take a moment to go over our meeting protocols today. We are continuing to have our meeting in a virtual meeting setting to ensure the health and safety of the public by limiting human contact that could spread the COVID-19 virus. This meeting is a study session of the Cultural Heritage Commission and Community Workshop for Phase 2 of the Accessory Dwelling Units, ADUs, update, which is facilitating ADUs while implementing historic preservation standards. Community members will be participating live in this meeting to provide inputs. I thank all of you for your patience as we proceed with our meeting today. So I'd like to do roll call. Will staff note that the following individuals are present? Commissioner Morris, Commissioner Cross. Is he here?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Cross is not here this evening. We did check with him today and he said he'll be joining us, so he'll be joining us a little bit late.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lopez, Vice Chair Gallatin, and myself are present. Council Liaison, Council Member Zneimer.
Our council
And staff
liaison is also not here, Madam Chair. She's probably going to be joining us a little bit late too.
Okay, thank you. And Staff Liaison, Planning Manager Kanika Keth are also present. This study session for Phase 2 ADUs Ordinance Update, Project Introduction, and Community Outreach. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned earlier, this is Phase 2 of our ADU Ordinance Update. Phase 2 is being funded by the CLG grant. Back in 2020, we received a $40,000 grant from the State Office of Historic Preservation to develop objective design standards and procedures for promoting ADUs on historic properties while implementing historic preservation standard. I have here is actually Evan Charles from ARG. She is our consultant that's going to be working with us to help us develop the objective design standard, and that needs to be in compliance with the state standard as well. So Evan, can you go ahead and start your presentation?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before you start, I want to let the attendees know that during the meeting, after the presentation, once the chair open up for community input, we'll start inviting people in to participate in the discussion to provide their inputs on what they would like to see for historic properties along ADU and historic properties. And I ask that if they can raise their hand so we could bring them in. If they are going to be typing in questions to the question and answer chat, we will not be answering those questions, but we'll take them for review as we work on Phase 2. Okay, Evan, you can go.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Evan St. Charles, and I'm an architectural historian and preservation planner with Architectural Resources Group. ARG has the pleasure of working with the city in preparing the Accessory Dwelling Units Ordinance Amendment, specifically the updates associated with ADU projects on historic properties. Architectural Resources Group was founded in 1980. We have offices in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Portland. We are a preservation design firm of architects, planners, and conservators. In our planning group, we work on a variety of project types, including historic resources surveys, historic context statements, Millset consultations, historic preservation ordinances, and design guidelines for historic properties. We have extensive experience preparing historic design guidelines, including South Pasadena's residential design guidelines, and more recently, design guidelines for the cities of Redlands and Anaheim. As previously mentioned, the project consists of the development of design standards and procedures, as well as design guidelines for ADUs on historic properties and in South Pasadena's historic districts. South Pasadena's ADUs ordinance was updated in 2019 to comply with State Senate Bill number 13 and Assembly Bill numbers 68 and 881. Despite these updates, the city received interest from homeowners asking for additional refinements to clarify requirements and streamline the approval process. The planning consultant firm ARUP is currently working on amending the ADUs ordinance to address these issues. In January 2021, ARG was contracted to develop design standards and guidelines specifically for ADUs on historic properties and in historic districts. The design standards, along with procedures for approving ADU projects on historic properties and in historic districts, will be incorporated into the amended ordinance being prepared by ARUP. The design guidelines will comprise a separate handbook intended to complement and assist with the application of the design standards. So, what properties will be subject to the design standards being developed for ADUs on historic properties? Properties beholden to these ADU standards will include individual residential historic properties that are designated at the federal, state, or local level, residential historic districts that are designated at the federal, state, or local level. This includes non-contributing properties in historic districts. For those of you who are unaware, non-contributors are buildings that are too altered to convey their historic significance or appearance, as well as buildings that were built after the historic district was developed and gained its significance. The standards for non-contributing properties will be more relaxed and less stringent compared to those for contributing and individually significant residences. The standards are also intended to apply to individual buildings that have been determined eligible and are listed in the city's historic resources inventory, and buildings in historic districts that have been determined eligible and are listed in the city's HRI. For more information regarding which properties are intended or are included in the city's HRI, please refer to the link in this slide. At this point, you may be asking what the difference is between design standards and design guidelines. Design standards are criteria used to determine whether a project complies with municipal code. They provide direction for making appropriate choices when undergoing changes to a property, and in this case, specifically to historic properties or properties within historic districts. They are legally binding, so an owner must comply with the standards in order for a project to be approved. It's important to emphasize that the standards being developed for ADUs on historic properties are objective. They will be based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, which are very general historic preservation principles established by the federal government. However, they will be much more specific with little room for interpretation so that they may be easily applied at the planning counter. The standards being prepared by ARG will not conflict with those already developed for ADUs, but will rather add additional parameters for historic properties while still complying with state law. Design guidelines are planning documents that guide alterations and new construction on historic properties and in historic districts. They help property owners to manage their historic properties in ways that preserve the historic character of their neighborhood and city. They assist in applying the design standards, often by providing examples of best practices through the use of illustrations and other graphics. For example, if the design standards allow for the replacement of non-historic garage doors when converting a garage into an ADU, the design guidelines may provide examples of potential appropriate replacement doors, like the illustration in this slide. Unlike the standards, the design guidelines are not legally binding. So they may include recommendations on treatment options that are encouraged, as well as those that are discouraged, but a homeowner is not legally required to follow the recommendations. I'll spend the rest of this presentation discussing ARG's project approach, work plan, and schedule, with time for questions at the end. ARG had a kickoff meeting with city staff and the Cultural Heritage Subcommittee in January 2021. At this time, project goals, scope, timeline, communications methodology, and key deliverables were discussed. Following project kickoff, ARG began to review the previous existing ADUs ordinance, the citywide historic context statement, historic residential design guidelines, and other pertinent background materials, including examples of ADU ordinances and guidelines in other cities. ARG's next deliverable is to create an outline of the design standards and guidelines for city review and comment. Potential topics to be covered in the ADU's design standards and guidelines include location and setbacks of the ADUs, ADU typologies, so a garage conversion, a detached ADU, or an attached ADU or JADU, height, so 1 or potentially 2 stories. We are in the process of considering whether 2-story ADUs are appropriate on historic properties. Architectural style. The city of South Pasadena features a diverse range of historic architectural styles, and the standards and guidelines will be created to address the predominant stylistic types in the city. And required design elements. So, for example, the roof pitch or type, the wall cladding type or material, so wood clapboard versus stucco, entry type, which may be a stoop or a courtyard entry, and window and door types. These design elements will likely vary according to the construction period and style of the primary residence to ensure the ADU is compatible with the historic property. And here's the project timeline. In early March, a postcard survey will be sent to residents to gather feedback that will be used in the creation of the design standards and guidelines. In April, ARG will transmit an internal draft to the city for review and comment. In June, ARG will transmit a public review draft and a second outreach meeting will be held. This meeting will give residents a chance to provide feedback to the team on the draft standards and guidelines. In July, a final draft will be submitted to the Cultural Heritage Commission for recommendation to City Council. In August, a final draft will be sent to City Council for consideration. And in September, the City Council is expected to adopt the design standards and guidelines. We do have a particularly tight timeline for this project because the project is being funded by a certified local government grant through the federal government or the National Park Service, and we need to adhere to the grant timeline. Thank you for your time and attention. We would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Madam Chair, before we move on, we did receive one public comment for this item that we would like to play for you. Melinda, can you play that audio? Oh, and also, Madam Chair, I want to know for the record that our council liaison has joined us in this meeting. Let me see if I'll go and play the audio.
My name is Joshua Breck. this is for the Cultural Heritage Commission Special Meeting 2/18/21. Item 2. I just watched the YouTube from the previous ADU presentation, and there were some things that were presented there that they're discussing with you today that's pretty much blatantly illegal. We'll refer to the ADU handbook published from HCD December 2020. Bottom of page 9. This has been the law for a long time, so I'm actually shocked it came up. Can the government apply design and development standards to ADU? Yes, they could do it on parking, height, setback, landscape, architectural review, yada, yada, yada. It says these standards must be sufficiently objective to allow a ministerial review of ADU. Go to the next page. What does objective mean? Objective zoning standards and objective design review standards mean standards that no person or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowledgeable to both the development applicant or proponent. During the presentation this past week, they said that they were going to apply the Secretary of Interior standards, that the ADU must adhere to the same materials and style of historic structure, compatible uses. They actually said that they wanted the applicant to provide a narrative of how this ADU fits into the historic structure of the neighborhood. This is all on minute 40 of the presentation. This is blatantly illegal. It has to be objective design reviews. I mean, you could do objective standards, but what was mentioned in the meeting on the this past week is totally illegal. They also said, what was the other thing? Anyways, Teresa Highsmith, please say something. You're the lawyer. You're supposed to know these things. You're supposed to stop planning from doing these things. It may not overwhelm the resource or impact its defined characteristics and maintain its integrity. That's not objective. That's illegal. This is the kind of things that will get you guys sued. Thank you so very much for your time. I hope Teresa Highsmith actually says something. Thanks. Bye.
Madam Chair, that's the last of the comment.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for staff? No? Okay.
It looks like
Commissioner
Mark Gallatin is.
Oh, Vice Chair Gallatin?
Is my audio okay now? No?
You need to speak up a little bit more, Ms. Commissioner Gallatin.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Better. Can you
Yeah.
yell a little bit more?
Yeah. Okay, so I listened to the public comments that you just played, and I listened to it previously prior to the meeting. And although I wasn't able to attend virtually the last study session that was done on phase 1 of the ADU, some of the points that were made by the speaker were slightly concerning to me. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions related to that, and also related to the synthesis between phase 1 and phase 2 of the ADU ordinance update. So to that end, my first question is, I'd like to have a little bit more elaboration, either from staff or our consultants, about the adherence to the Secretary of Interior standards and how those relate to our developing design guidelines and standards, which by state law must be objective.
Mark, could you repeat your question?
Okay. I would like a little bit more elaboration from either staff or our consultants about how adherence to the Secretary of Interior standards, to what extent is that adherence required, and how is that balanced with the state requirement for objectivity in the design guidelines that we're working on?
Okay, I can answer that question first, and Evan, you can join in if you want. So to answer that question, we appreciate the comments received from the public on that from Josh. Just to remind the commission that the whole purpose of this meeting is really to gather input from both and direction from both the commission and the community members to help us develop objective design standards for promoting ADUs on historic properties. So what we're going to try to do in part phase 2 is really to look at the Secretary Interior Design Standard and make them into objective design standard that could be implemented at staff level. But we're going to also be evaluating to see if staff level review for ADU on historic property should apply to the different ADUs. Is it attached, detached, garage conversion? That's something that we'll have to evaluate, and we're looking to get feedback, input from the community on that. In regard to Josh's question about the language that was planning to go into our draft ordinance that's going to be presented to Planning Commission on Tuesday, I believe that language has been revised or removed. So the whole purpose of phase 1 is to develop objective design standard to promote ADUs, but not on historic properties. It's just only for non-historic properties. We want the expert of ARD to help us develop objective design standard for historic property, so that if we're approving at staff level, it will not impact our historic resources or our historic neighborhood. Evan, did you have anything else to add on that?
Sure, I can add to that. So, using our expertise and our understanding of the Secretary of the Interior standards, our intent is to develop much more specific, detailed standards related to kind of the applicability of the standards for ADUs. So, for instance, when you look at the Secretary of the Interior standards, it mentions compatibility for materials. Something that we might require or suggest is that an ADU have the same cladding material as the primary residence, and that is very straightforward, as opposed to the general language that the Secretary of the Interior standards use. So our intent is to make them objective and detailed enough that they can be used by anybody at the planning counter.
All right, thank you, Evan and Shanika. Very good response. My next question is really not for my edification, but more so for the members of the public who might be watching and might have concerns or questions about it. Can you briefly explain, first of all, why are we doing the ADU ordinance in 2 phases with 2 different timelines? And what steps are being taken to synthesize 2 phases to make sure that they are consistent, not contradictory?
So we did this in 2 phases. We had planned to do the ADU ordinance update, so that started earlier for non-historic properties. And we always intend to do develop objective design standard for historic properties separately. We want to fast track update to our ADU ordinance to help out people who want to develop ADU on non-historic property. We don't want to hold it out just because of historic property. So that's why we broke it up in 2 phases, because we do have a lot of inquiries from people that's non-historic property wanting to do ADU, 2-story ADUs, or having an ADU in front of their main house. We ran into a couple of properties where their primary resident is in the back of the yard. And under our ordinance right now, we cannot do that. So and also the whole purpose of it too is to bring our ADU ordinance up to the recent HCD requirement. So that's why we have it broken into 2 phases. And our phase 1 lightly touch on historic properties in regard to placement, but really defer development of ADU on historic properties to our current CHC ordinance. Which means then if someone wants to do an ADU and attach it to a historic resource, it will be subject to CHC review. But what we're doing here in phase 2 now is try to explore other option on how to promote ADUs and figure out which type of ADUs would be appropriate for the full CHC commission review and which one are appropriate for staff level review.
And one final question. You mentioned the effort to determine which types of ADUs might be appropriate for CHC review, how do we square that with the state requirement that this not involve discretionary review?
That's what we're going to rely on ARG to help us with. Well, what we need to explore is what do we define as our historic properties? What will be subject to these standards that we're developing as well too, and ARG will be helping us with them to develop objective design standard guidelines as well as procedures.
All right, thank you. I have no other questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Morris?
Hi, so if I just should be better clear on this, because I watched the other ADU presentation. Do you want from us tonight, like a poll of yes, we think 1 or 2 stories, or yes, we think the front entry to the ADU should be on the same plane as the primary residence, that kind of detail? Or what is the purpose of tonight's meeting for the commissioners that are involved?
So we don't have specific questions about that. We do want to remind the attendees that there is a survey that we would like them to complete after this meeting. But this meeting is really being put out for the commission and the community to tell us what is it that you want to see us address? What are some of the concerns you have heard that you want us to address in phase 2? And what is it that you want to see? We have to allow ADUs on historic properties, but in what mechanism, what procedures, what does this commission feel is appropriate? And what does the commission and what does the community as a whole want in protecting our historic resources while promoting ADU? So it's really open-ended meeting today to receive input, direction.
Okay, so just to start the conversation, I believe on the last presentation, even the regular ADUs, if they exceeded a certain square footage or if they went to the max, then they had some sort of discretionary review. If they stayed within 1,000 square feet or something, they didn't. So is it conceivable that CHC could review historic properties that aren't just adapting an existing accessory structure, but rather building a new one? Would we be allowed to review a new ADU, a new accessory structure on a historic property? Do you know the answer to that?
We don't, and that's some of the question that we like to hear from the commission and also from the community to help us develop some specific standards and procedure that we will propose to you at a later date, will be presented to this commission, to our planning commission, to our design review board, and the community as a whole to give us feedback on those draft standards and procedures. So the questions you brought up are very good questions. Like, for example, in the last meeting, we had a question about if people wanted ADU, a 2-story ADU on historic property. We did get a lot of interest on that. There's people that express the desire to do 2-story ADUs on historic properties. So what we like to see now is, okay, if we're going to allow ADUs, 2-story ADUs on historic property, what did this commission want to see? Under state law, they could do 1-story, but 2-story, there is ability that in certain location be subject to the commission's review, to discretionary review. But that's something we have to take in and review to make sure it complies with state law.
Well, if you do want input this evening, I don't know how long this meeting goes, but it would feel to me like we should comply with state law, but things that start to exceed that or at the very end of it should have some sort of discretionary review. I think if there isn't an existing structure, that's probably something we could review. If there is an existing structure on a historic property, they should be able to do that without any discretionary review, as long as there's some design standards and guidelines printed. I don't know how much information you want tonight or whether we're all just going to hang around and shoot the breeze.
I think this is good. So what I'm hearing from you is that we need to comply with state law, but also see that if there's other ability for discretionary review, we should explore that.
Well, certainly. I mean, I think as it relates to historic properties, I think we could be a little more stringent than the other properties because we've spent a good amount of time trying to protect those resources. And I think our city would continue to try to do that. So while we wouldn't prohibit an ADU, we would look a little longer and harder at a new constructed ADU behind a historic property than we would adapting an existing accessory dwelling into an ADU on a historic property.
So one question that we also have a lot of time too is somebody that might want to do an ADU on top of their garage that is probably built at the same time as the main resident. something like that is something that we also would like to get feedback from the commission on, if you would like that to be, if you cannot answer that question tonight, you're free to email us feedbacks and question as well on how what's appropriate. And I know we cannot answer that question today because ARG and staff need to do some research on it to see what state law allows to do as discretion and what's not. But let me know if I'm wrong. It sounds like, so if, for example, if state law said, okay, single story ADU on historic property is permitted, but if you go 2-story, then the city have the authority to require discretionary review by the commission. So in which case, would this commission want us to bring that 2-story ADU to this commission for review, or would you prefer to do it at staff level? That's kind of what we're looking for.
Well, I would be curious to hear from the other commissioners. My personal opinion would be in that instance, I'd like CHC to review it. If it's a 2-story, because I don't think we should have 2-story ADUs behind historic properties, but other commissioners, I'd be curious to see what you guys have to say.
Okay.
Yeah,
Don
I
Delgado?
can, it seems to me that actually, I personally think that I cannot speak for legal matters. I leave that to the experts. So, but in terms of the review, and my opinion is that both design CHC or DRB should be able to review ADUs. I mean, besides the legal ramifications, these are 1-story or 2-story. This is not just changing a garage door to regular doors. Maybe if that's the case, then that's fine. But I mean, I think these are potentially big structures that have big impact on and if it's an attached garage, it's even worse. I mean, I don't so that certainly is going to affect what you see from the street and everything else. So it seems to me that that both boards should be involved in this. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how to go about doing that. And I personally think that people should be able to build an ADU in their backyard if they want. It's just a matter of going through the process. It's the same process for everyone, so that's what I think. Also, I'm not very clear on how the FAR is related to these ADUs. As I understand it, a garage can be as much as 500 square feet. So, but if your house already is right at the border of the FAR or right at the FAR, you get those 500 feet for an ADU. So you're 500 square feet above your FAR already. Is there a limit to that, or it's open? It's free for all. That's kind of that, because I'm a big believer of the FAR. So that's how we control sizes in the city, not only sizes on the structure, but garages. So, if not, it becomes Mac mentions. So how do we control that? That would be my other comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Lopez. You brought a really good point. What we have to do here is really balancing historic law with ADU laws. And that's what we're trying to do. And as you mentioned with FAR in phase 1 of our ADU ordinance update is, and also in compliance with state ADU laws, is that 800 square feet of an ADU is permitted to exceed our FAR and lot coverage, as long as it meets the rear and side yard setback of 4 feet. And also meet our, so, and Liz is actually on here too, who's working on the draft ordinance right now that will be released to Planning Commission for consideration on Tuesday. So I would like to encourage the commission and also the attendees tonight to look out for our agenda packet, which will probably go out tomorrow or this weekend, that will have the draft ordinance of the ADU that will help answer more specific questions for non-historic properties. But for phase 2 of our project here, we want to focus on historic properties and to work with the community and the commission on developing those objective design standard and procedure. So I thank you for giving us that feedback that you guys would like to see discretionary review for two-story ADU. Evans, was there any other specific question you may have? It looks like Commissioner Gallatin have a question.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to weigh in on the discussion regarding two-story ADUs on historic properties. And I'm not going to wade into the issue about discretionary versus non-discretionary review, because I realize staff and the consultants are still researching the limitations of that. But I just wanted to make a practical point, something to think about, and that is on many of our historic properties, the garages were constructed at the same time as the house. So they might be 100 years or more older. And because the garage, by definition, is an accessory structure, they often just have a slab on grade, and they don't have a foundation that was designed for a live load on the second floor to accommodate a living area. So that is just a practical matter to keep in mind. And we don't want to create unintended consequences where if we do allow a two-story ADU in a historic property, people say, well, you know what, I just want to demolish my historic garage and build a brand new two-story structure with a proper foundation. So we have to be thinking about those sort of things, very pragmatic issues as we work this through. That's all I wanted to say.
If I can jump in here, there are ways of creating a superstructure or a substructure where you don't touch the garage really. It would be awkward at best. But as far as review, it's my understanding we won't have any review powers once this thing gets going. The whole object of the design standards that we would be producing are objective standards that the people at the desk if we ever go back into City Hall again, but a planning desk would be able to look at a plan that's submitted for ADU, say, okay, it complies in 5 out of 6 standards, but it doesn't comply with this particular standard. So you have to go back to the drawing board. But we will never, as the CHC, we will never have discretionary review of these ADUs, will we?
You could. That's why we need to evaluate what the community wants, and we have to balance historic preservation law with ADU law. Under ADU law, there are specific parameters that the city need to allow for under staff level review, administrative review, not discretionary review. But at the same time, there are stuff that the HCD, they do allow discretionary review. And we're gonna look into that further.
Okay,
just to add to Kanika's comment, something that we had been discussing internally is the fact that adding on to an existing primary residence at the rear, if there is no discretionary review, that conflicts with the CHC ordinance. So that's just one of a few examples that may allow for discretionary review, depending on whether whether or not it conflicts with state law. But it seems like that might be an instance where the CHC would be allowed to comment on the ADU construction.
Thank you, Evan. Madam Chair, I'm looking at time. It's at 5:40. This meeting was supposed to go on until 6. I mean, we could go on a little bit longer before our 6:30 meeting, but I want to let you know we do have 16 attendees. So if the commission would like, maybe we can open up the floor for public input, and then the commission can resume discussion later, if that's okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. It looks like we have one person that would like to ask a question. Josh has his hand up. I'm gonna bring him in. Josh, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I can.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Mark, I just wanted to say thanks for your comment. I hope you actively get, oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Sorry, I
I
had
can hear
myself muted. Mark, I appreciated your comment. I hope you really get involved in this planning of the ADUs, because I've seen multiple things that are illegal. Like you can't, like the laws were passed so that ADUs cannot be removed by committees. And, you know, Kanika just said, hey, yes, we'd like this to be reviewed by the CDC. Laws specifically outlawed that. So, you know, I hope that Mark, you actually personally get involved because you actually know the laws here so that these things that are illegal stop getting proposed. That is all. Thank you very much. The presentation did say some ways you can do objective design standards, and those are great. I hope those happen. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Are there any more?
Yeah, it looks like. someone
Yeah,
brought-
Darby is unmuted. Darby, you want to speak? You're unmuted.
Darby? Maybe we can bring him back later. We'll bring out in our next community members that would like to ask question.
Okay.
Let's bring in-
Joanne?
Joanne, can you unmute yourself?
Joanne, you're muted right now. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, got it. Sorry, this is new to me, this live thing. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to comment that I live in a historic district. We have a 2-story garage that we rebuilt. We had to get a variance for. It was on a slab. It was basically a barn that needed to be rebuilt. This was in the 80s, I guess. And the city put us through hell. And ultimately, we were able to build or rebuild our garage with the 2nd story, but we had to put a covenant on our deed that we would never rent it out. So I find this, it's like we're 360 or back to, I have visions going through that we went through before. And now, because of the state, it's like the complete opposite, and it's going to make it easier. So what we did is we tried to make it fit in, and it is no taller than the house because we have with eaves and everything else. It sits back and on the property line, and it fits in, and it looks, we made it to match the house. So I don't know. I'm really concerned because I listened to the presentation last week, and my concern is the lack of the proper design for where either the non-historic or the historic ADUs. And I felt that may be the weak point and could have a negative effect on the neighborhoods and the community if it's not handled properly with a lot of supervision. Because there are so many properties in town that are, out of the norm. So I think it's going to take a special consideration on the design end to make sure everything fits in.
Thank you. Evan, do you want to address that on some level? As far as what we can and cannot do, especially but this is just for historic properties, right?
Yeah, but before Evan, sorry, I just want to remind a community member that look at it today, that today is kind of really a kickoff meeting to gather input. So I'm not sure if Evan can answer that question specifically to what Joanne Knuckles is telling us. And I thank you for sharing your experience with the city on the process and what you've gone through. And as you can see, under state law, we are trying to promote ADU production within our city to help us meet our housing needs. But okay, Evans, I'll let you see if you can answer the rest.
Oh, I was just going to add, and Kanika is right that we are still very early on in the process of developing the standards and guidelines, but the intent of both the standards and guidelines is that there will be information related specifically to architectural style and ensuring that the ADUs that are proposed are compatible with the style of the historic property and or the historic district that it's located in. More of that will be included in the handbook with illustrations to clearly convey what may or may not be recommended. So, hopefully those will help with some of Joanne's concerns.
Thank you. Yeah, so to remind the commission that this process actually includes design standard, design guideline, which will be a separate document from our ADU ordinance, as well as procedures that will include into our ADU ordinance on how to handle the various ADUs on historic properties and in historic district. And we're hoping that the design guidelines that will be developed will help property owners who's interested in doing ADUs on historic property to have a clear understanding of what they can do, for administrative review versus, if anything, for discretionary review.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I mean, the design standard will clarify that. We do have Darby still have his hand up. Darby, do you want to ask a question? Or you having technical difficulty there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry, I had to switch devices. Apologize for that. Commissioners, good to speak with you again. It's been a while. I just wanted to point out, I had heard in the presentation that one of the objective standards regarding historic properties might be that materials be the same for ADUs versus the original historic structure. And it's my understanding that new work should be differentiated from the old, and the old should be, the historic structure should be protected from removing any historic features, but that additionally the new addition should not mimic the old. It should be differentiated so that there's a difference between what is old and what is new. So I would think that the objective standards would need to tread lightly on saying that the materials need to be the same. I think that could be overly restricting on good design, and potentially over restricting on the construction of an ADU as well. And I don't know that it necessarily that specific objective, and I realize it's early, I don't know that that specific objective standard meets the intent of Secretary of Interior standards. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Darby.
Great.
Madam Chair, it looks like Miss Joanne Knuckles have her hand back up. Can we bring her back in?
Can I just jump in for a sec, because that comment was really about the proposal that's in phase 1, and that there have been changes. So have a look at the staff report when it gets posted, and that standard that you just referenced has, I believe, been eliminated.
To let the commissioner know, that is our Liz Burrell is our interim long range planning manager, who's working on phase 1 of the ADU ordinance update that's going to be presented to planning commission. So that is in reference to the draft ordinance about referring compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards, and that language has been removed. Joanne, your hand still up? Okay.
Yeah. Hi, I just want to say, not that I'm against ADUs, because we're working on a project now with our partner, and we're converting the garage to an ADU, and there's a particularly odd, bizarre situation where the back wall is the interior wall of the neighbor's garage. So it's taken us like 9 months working with Craig to sort through the fire safety issues on that. And but one thing about that project is there's sufficient parking in the driveway for about 4 or 5 cars. And that's my concern from the other presentation and in historic district, is if it's going to put cars out on the street, which is an issue. We had to do all sorts of contortions with ours for the parking requirements from back in the 80s. So I'm just saying that, not that I'm against ADUs, but I am kind of concerned about what it means for parking and additional cars in the neighborhood on the street.
Thank you.
Does anyone else?
Madam Chair, it looks like we're at 5:50. There are some questions in our question and answer chat. Let me see, let me ask if any of them, and there's some comments too. Thanks for that. Keep in mind, this is not just question only, but also to provide comments. It looks like we have some people who asked question and a question. I want to see if any of the attendees would like to ask these comments live to our commission, or ask these questions or provide comments live. If so, can you please raise your hand and we can bring you in. It doesn't look like anybody have their hands up anymore. Well, Linda, can you check?
Yeah, there's no one with their hand raised right now.
Okay, so the questions and comments that were provided in our questions and answer chat, that will be downloaded, and staff and ARG will be reviewing them to use it to help us develop our draft ordinance.
Okay. Based on the inputs from the community, does anybody on the commission, any of the commissioners have additional direction or input to staff? Please raise your hand if you do. Commissioner Lopez?
One quick comment, and is that it probably won't be fair for the staff on the counter to make decisions like this. I don't think that they, I don't think that's what they want. So I just bringing that up as, as a comment, that they rely on the expertise of the boards and the commissions to not have to do very hard decisions when, every case is different. I think you try to standardize guidelines, but really it's hard to implement same set of guidelines to all the different conditions we're going to encounter. So just a comment.
I hope my comments didn't mislead you there, because it was my misunderstanding that we wouldn't be able to have any discretionary review. That's what's going to be determined now.
Well, my last comment would be, I think we probably can put objective design standards together that are very, very clear, and still allow some ADUs that don't immediately meet them or exceed them or have some other deal to go through some discretionary process. They're allowed to do that if they don't meet the specific design standard. So I feel like we could work that out. And there's I've looked at a couple different cities stuff, and they're out there. So we just need a little more homework, I think. And then we can come up with some standards and some procedures as to when discretionary review is necessary.
Thank you. Vice Chair Gallatin?
To address the points made by Commissioner Lopez, I think you might be underestimating our staff, our counter staff. I think they're going to be just fine, capable of carrying these out, but that's only on the assumption that they get proper training. So I just want to emphasize to staff, let's make sure once the guidelines and standards have been codified and adopted by our city council, that we do a really good job of training all the planning staff on these and how to apply them. Because I know from having worked at public counters for many years, if you're not given the proper training and just kind of thrown out there, sink or swim, that's not a good situation. So really want to emphasize the need for proper training.
Thank you. I think that's it. And
Thank you. Madam Chair, I want to add, it looks like Josh has his hand raised. Could I bring him back in?
please.
Josh? Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry for the sigh you had there, Kanika. Will this be reviewed by the city attorney to be sure that what is proposed is legal? Oh,
yeah, I was going to actually mention that to our commission, that this ordinance this objective design standard will not only be reviewed by our city attorney, it will also be reviewed by the State Office of Historic Preservation and HCD.
Okay, can you do that with your other stuff too? Thank you.
I think you're mentioning the phase 1 ADU ordinance update, Josh. That one, Liz is online. She can answer that question.
Yes, well, I mean, of course, we are working with the city attorney on developing the, as with all ordinances, we work with the city attorney. And in the particular case of what we're looking at right now with ADUs, because the state law is not always written in the easiest way to understand. There's been a lot of questions sort of up and down the state about what it means. And as our consultant has mentioned, as Evan said, there is the state law regarding historic resources that also has to be taken into account, and how those two are balanced. So the ADU law does not obviate the need for cultural heritage protection and all of the laws that go with it. So what we're looking at, and we'll be consulting with the state, as well as, obviously our city attorney is consulting with them to determine what that balance is when it comes to ADUs on cultural resources.
Thank you. Does anybody else have their hand up? I can't tell.
No, and it looks like we have a couple of minutes before 6. It looks like our commission is done. So if any members of the attendees out there would like to provide additional feedback and comments, please raise your hand.
Commissioner Lopez?
I have one last comment to just something I learned. When I was in the design review board, there was a re-roofing permit that was given to these residents in I can't remember the exact area. I would have to look at it in the map. Is the area around the Marengo area that's got that park in the center, not the Eddy Park, but the other kind of drive around area. We received, the staff received calls from the neighbors about this re-roofing job, and the new roof had been done with these mounds of material. And of course, re-roofing, you give the material, you have it reviewed, the color, okay, fine, and it's done. And we end up getting calls from neighbors because the roofing was not just shingles on our roof, it had these mounds. So they created some kind of design with it. Did I like it or not like it? It doesn't matter. It's a matter that somebody took. So we have to be careful with the freedoms. I don't want to necessarily say freedom. I don't think that's the right word, but things need to be reviewed. That's all I have to say. Because you leave them open and you will be amazed how creative the owners get. And it doesn't affect, it affects people around them, So it will be reviews for everybody at the same time. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. I think that brings our meeting to an end. Thank you to ARG, Evan, staff, and community members for your input. This meeting is great for allowing us commissioners and community members to participate in the process, which is really important, obviously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would like to remind the commission that we have our 6:30 meeting tonight at 6:30, so don't forget to join. Okay, thank you. So it is 6 o'clock and we adjourn the meeting. Thanks.